Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you all. I, like many of you, was fortunate enough to receive some gifts on this Jesus Day, and most of the presents were really good. I also got a present which I did not expect. At all.
Yeah.
It's humbling because someone spent $500 grand on me, but it also confirms an assumption of mine, that my family definitely don't watch my videos, which is actually pretty liberating, as it means I have total freedom in whatever I want to say in this one. If you haven't seen my video I made all the way back in June about why the Xbox One X sucks, I'll leave a link to it now on screen. It's one of the best videos I've ever made, but to summarise my opinions on the console back then, they weren't exactly rosy. Now that I actually own the hardware and have had a good chance to play around with it, is my opinion the same as it was, or has it improved? No, it's not improved. In fact, somehow, it's actually worse than I thought it was. Why not start at the very beginning of the Xbox One X experience with the unboxing? The X wastes no time in disappointing, as when you open the box of the console you just spent $500 grand on, you will find the most plain, bare minimum packaging they could have gone with. Seriously, I've received replacement phone screens with more impressive packaging. It's quite literally the bare minimum of what it takes to package something. Just plain white cardboard with plain white foam and polystyrene sheet housing the console, along with a plain white cardboard box containing the accessories. No Xbox branding, no nothing on any of it. Even if they just simply changed the colour of the internal packaging from white to black to match the console, it would have helped the unboxing experience feel just a notch above a McDonald's Happy Meal. But instead, you just get the feeling that they penny pinched at every opportunity possible. Definitely not the feeling you want when you're spending this kind of money on something. But wait, the disappointment doesn't end there, as I was simply blown away how little accessories you get with a console that costs this much. What you get is a controller, a power lead, and HDMI. And that's it. First of all, there should have been an Elite controller with the console, and there wasn't. For the price point and intended market for this machine, it's pretty insulting to not have one. Not only that, this new generation of controller feels remarkably cheap compared to the earlier generation. The plastics used feel softer and the analog sticks don't click so much as they crunch when you press them. My old Gen 1 controller, which has been abused and mangled by my dog several times, still felt better to use than the brand new Gen 2 controller, just to give you perspective on how bad the quality feels. I wasn't even the one who paid for this console, and I was still disappointed. Had I been the one paying for it, I would have been pissed. To top it all off, the controller doesn't even come with rechargeable batteries, which isn't that big of a deal because you can plug the controller into the Xbox directly with a USB cable. A USB cable that doesn't come with the console. To get that functionality, you have to use a plain charge kit, which is sold separately. There's also no Ethernet cable because Microsoft obviously thinks Wi-Fi is so good that you just don't need one. There's no free Xbox Live headset thrown in, and probably a few other things I've forgotten to mention. But it's okay, because they give you a redeemable code that lets you enjoy online multiplayer for 14 days without having to pay taxes. Wow. Seeing as we're off to such a good start, let's talk about the setup of the machine itself. Upon hooking up the machine, I was reminded that the days of consoles being plug and play have been replaced with what I call plug and come back tomorrow. Hooking up the console via Ethernet to a 300 megabits per second fiber connection, it still took the console around 24 hours to complete all firmware updates, game downloads, game installations, and game updates that could be fit onto the drive, which was only around 15 games, and only about 5 of which were small Xbox 360 titles. In theory, the sheer download speed should have allowed it to complete much faster. However, the fastest the Xbox One X can download seems to peak at around 250 megabits per second, which it rarely ever hits, Most of the time it's spent downloading at around 150 megabits per second, with frequent long pauses where it stops downloading completely, presumably to unpack the downloaded archives before moving on to the next chunk. Now this is a best case scenario too, and I feel bad for a lot of those people who have poor internet connections, especially so as a lot of Xbox One X enhanced titles don't have 4K assets on the discs and have to instead be streamed over the web. In the case of Forza 7, there was about 45 gigabytes of data to install from the disc, and over 50 gigabytes of extra data to download from the web. The game ended up being around 95 gigabytes in size, with no extra DLC installed. Other games on the system are already over 100 gigabytes, and that leads me on to my next point, being that the 1 terabyte of built-in storage is nowhere near enough for this console. Everyone can agree that a regular Xbox with a 500 gig drive is horribly choked in its storage capacity. Well, seeing as the download of 4K assets is at the very least doubling the size of games, you don't have to be a genius to figure out that 1 terabyte has no chance in hell of cutting it. And considering in Microsoft's own words that this console is targeted at their enthusiast audience, you know, the very audience who buys a lot of games, it seems crazy to have anything less than 2 terabytes in the system. Now it wouldn't be so bad if Xbox made the hard drive user upgradable, like Sony does with the PlayStation 3 and 4, instead of having to buy completely new systems, but alas, they didn't. And no, using an external drive is not a good solution. It's a messy solution to a problem Microsoft created by not allowing users to upgrade their internal drives themselves. Not to mention you only get 3 USB ports on the X, and only one of which is on the front. Why can't we go back to the days of the Xbox 360 Slim that had 5 USB ports? I miss those days. As soon as I got to the dashboard to download games, I was asked to download the settings used on my old console, which I agreed to. Though I'm not sure exactly what it changed, as I still ended up having to tweak a bunch of settings, including going into my game download list and re-hiding all the games I don't care about, which took what felt like a while. We still don't have native mouse and keyboard support, a feature that has been teased since the middle of 2016. We are now in 2018 and it still isn't here. Any teasers of the feature from this point on, I'm not getting my hopes up, and if it does finally drop, it's not going to be what we hope it will be. Instead, hearing Mike Ybarra explain the feature in an interview from E3, it will unfortunately be a gimped feature with a lot of console exceptions, caveats and restrictions. One thing I find rather odd is the whole Xbox One X enhanced branding Microsoft are pushing. When I see X enhanced, all I see is a confirmation that the $500 grand of console you just bought is actually being utilised. I certainly don't see it as something to be excited for, instead something to be expected from all games. I mean, there's nothing quite like the infuriating feeling of playing a game that isn't X enhanced and is basically offering the same exact experience found on the much less expensive Xbox One S. I suppose I now know the feeling owners of SLI and Crossfire setups feel when they have to disable one of the GPUs to make a game work, having hundreds of dollars of hardware sat there doing absolutely nothing. Staying on the topic of the whole X enhanced BS, a small handful of backwards compatible Xbox 360 and original Xbox games are X enhanced, meaning that they are rendered in 4K and in some rare cases you get slightly better frame rates with the CPU clock speed increase. Now, I completely fail to see the excitement in this feature, as I can go back and fire up virtually any old game in my PC and run it at 4K, 6K, 8K resolutions and 30, 60 or 120 FPS, depending on what I feel like having that day. And I don't need to wait for a developer patch to do that. I can just go and do it. A small handful of the already small handful of X-enhanced games offer performance presets. A couple to note are Gears 4 and Rise of the Tomb Raider, as they offer 60 FPS 1080p modes, which is a welcome addition. However, such a small handful of games do this, and the performance is usually more like an unlocked frame rate mode as opposed to a true 60 FPS one. What's frustrating to me is a lot of the problems with the Xbox One X would simply go away if they gave console guys full control over the hardware, like with PC games. A couple of graphical presets aren't enough. We need full granular graphical control menus like we have on the PC, but I just don't see that happening. For whatever reason, it's a feature that almost no developer bothers adding. Once you finally have got all your games installed, you will have the opportunity to test out the main selling point of the console. The feature that the console, both with its software and hardware, was built from the ground up to support, which is of course 4K. Microsoft are banking hard, and I mean real hard, on 4K, as to go as far as writing it practically everywhere on the system, even etching it onto the APU silicon itself. No, I'm not kidding, they really did do that. If you've already watched a few of my videos, you may already know my thoughts on 4K, but to retread some old ground, basically, as a technology, I think 4K is incredible. The pixel density is so high that even when the image is stretched over a 50-inch display, and I get within a foot of the screen, it's still hard to tell the pixels apart. However, in the real world, where you aren't sitting with your eyeball pressed up against the TV, and you are instead sat at a regular viewing distance, there's not a discernible difference between 1080p and 4K. So, you might ask, if the element that the Xbox One X has been built around from the ground up is a gimmick, what does that mean for the console? Exactly, the entire console is a giant gimmick. So why does it exist then? Well, I'm going to tell you why it exists. The Xbox One X isn't designed for you. It's designed for Microsoft. A marketing tool designed to give a killing blow to Sony. To understand the reason for the Xbox One X's existence, you have to understand at a fundamental level why customers buy consoles. There have been studies come out to find out what the masses look for most in a game, and the aspect that they determine to be the most important about a game is the quality of the graphics. Because in their mind, the better the graphics are, the better the game must be. Now I know to you and me, graphics don't mean anything about how good the gameplay is, but the average Joe, the masses, they think it does. So once you understand this, now go and take a look at the original Xbox One around its launch. It was totally humiliated for being expensive, ugly. I mean, do you remember all the VCR memes? Those are some pretty tasty memes. But most importantly, it was humiliated for being underpowered. And that's the key word here. When the masses talk about which console to buy, they talked about the PS4 because it has the better graphics. And I'm sure the words, "Don't buy the Xbox, it's underpowered," has been muttered between normies on more than one occasion. The X was a tactical marketing maneuver by Microsoft to go from being known as the underpowered console to the house of power. Now, if you want the best in console graphics, you have to go to Microsoft, not Sony. It was no coincidence then that every single aspect of the Xbox One X was more powerful than the PS4 Pro. Whether the advantage was big or small, everything including the RAM, which it has more of at much greater speed, the huge teraflop advantage of the GPU, or the tiny 9% CPU clock speed advantage it has over the Pro. So then, with the knowledge that 4K is mostly an overblown gimmick, for those who have bought an Xbox One X and who have a 1080p display, I'm not sure how else to put this, but you've essentially paid over twice the price of an Xbox One Slim for 4 times SSAA. If you don't know what that means, it means that you've been chumped, bud. Absolutely, well and truly chumped. Struggling to find an actual legitimate use for the system, I got an idea in which I could store my movie collection on the X's internal drive, making it a sort of movie gaming media center, right? So, after I deleted a few games, I made the required 180 gigabytes of space, then tried to copy the movies to the drive, then quickly found out that the Xbox One won't let you do that.
There's no power greater than X.
So the way it works is the Xbox One X has a user area on the internal hard drive where you can store up to 15 gigabytes of data, and that includes video, music, mods and pictures. And once 15 gigabytes has been reached, you cannot store any more. So you have to either keep the USB stick plugged in, tying up your storage device and a precious USB port, or go and get a useful console like a PS3, which will let you store all of your movies on the internal drive. And that's my problem with the X, is that I was constantly finding out what the console can't do instead of what it can do. I find myself in a situation where I'm assuming it can do a thing that I can do with other or older consoles, and it just simply can't most of the time. Its feature set is practically non-existent, and what little it can do, it doesn't tend to do very well. The Xbox One X is a system that's trying to pull in both directions. It's trying to offer more options to players by giving them a choice of varying console performance brackets, but it won't allow them to actually take full advantage of the hardware with highly customizable features, with the best case scenario being developer made performance presets which just aren't enough. In addition to everything needing a developer patch to take advantage of the extra hardware, it's an extra ball and chain on an already limited system. It's like it wants to be a PC with having more freedoms, but doesn't want to have the complexity associated with having more freedom. So instead, it almost totally gimps the flexibility of the machine by making everything require standardization and developer patches. But its high price point prevents it from having the value of a console, so it's in this awkward position where, based on its merits alone, there's little to no reason to even buy one. One thing I've noticed is that most of the press have barely had anything negative to say about it. I was able to generate this list in a very short amount of time, and the general opinion of the press is that it's a pretty cool system, and maybe even a great little machine. Though, given the state of the mainstream press, it's not that much of a surprise, but it just feels weird seeing this kind of tiptoeing around the machine from these guys. Now, there is some things that I like about the console, and I'll list them here. You ready? So, firstly, I like the design. The console has a quality feel to it with its heavy weight and nice plastic construction. It's also a cool piece of engineering, as I can appreciate how difficult it was putting all of that power into such a small box. If you have an external drive, you can record in 4K 60 frames per second, which is awesome. It's very quiet, almost totally silent on the dashboard, probably one of the quietest consoles I've ever owned. Loading times are improved pretty much across the board, which is cool, although during normal use I can't say that it was a notable difference. I just know it's faster because I watched a video of people doing tests on it. It now uses a standard power lead instead of a proprietary one, which is nice, and that's it. That's all the things I could think of that I can honestly say are a legitimate positive of the system. And believe me, I tried to come up with as many as I could. Now, what's likely to happen is that the Xbox One X will just sell great anyway, even if there's no real point in buying one. If there's one thing that I've learned this generation, it's that people don't buy consoles based on their merits. They buy them based on the hype and how the console makes them feel. If the thought of buying that console feels good, that's usually enough reason for the masses to buy it. What they actually use it for is relatively unimportant to them during the purchasing process. Now, what I think would have made a better console was if Microsoft took the Xbox One Slim's hardware and basically just overclocked the holy hell out of it. I'm talking like 2.5 GHz CPU, 1100 MHz GPU, and overclocked the RAM. And of course, adding a beefier power delivery system and cooling system to handle all of that extra juice, and then just charge an extra $50 to $100 on top of the $200 Slim. And for the marketing angle, they can go out and say, hey, we've got the console that has the most improved frame rate. And I think that would actually be a legitimately improved machine, because frame rate always trumps visuals. But that probably wouldn't have sold as well as the most powerful console in the world. Now, I could have made this review a lot longer, and this already abbreviated version has been further cut down during the editing process, but I refuse to write any more about this machine as it's such a fail of a device. For a few days, it was actually making me feel really depressed writing about it. I actually feel a reserved hatred for this console, and I've never felt this way towards a console before. But I think the reason for it is because the Xbox One X is a physical culmination of all the things wrong with modern gaming. What of it being obsessed with graphics and pixels and not on things like frame rate or the quality of the simulation, which is reflected both in the software and the hilariously graphics biased hardware. The fact that it's 2018 and people are still paying taxes to play online multiplayer, which absolutely blows my mind. We have had 3 generations of consoles that have had online taxes, and during all 3 of those was the massive and obvious presence of PC gaming which didn't have online taxes. And if you go and take a look at how well PC gaming is doing, I'd say it turned out okay. Yet no one on the console scene is making a real fuss about this. Console gamers had an opportunity to rid themselves of online taxes at the start of the 8th generation, but instead of simply nothing changing, PlayStation went from offering tax-free multiplayer to charging for it. And what happened? Nobody batted an eye. In fact, I saw many gamers convincing themselves that it would be a reasonable thing and allow Sony to invest into PSN services to make it more reliable, which we all know how that turned out. If console players are not willing to defend their own hobby, then they deserve everything they get. This is why I see the Xbox One X as a symbol of something I despise, and it's just why I hate the machine. Like I said, it's a culmination of all the ridiculous business practices, the laser focus on irrelevant gimmicks and general nonsense of the 8th generation. All of it is personified into one piece of hardware, which, to top it all off, is horrendously expensive and just generally pointless. It was interesting watching my Xbox One X video back, a video I made over half a year ago, because I ended up nailing 100% every single thing about the Xbox One X, and I mean every single thing, and it's easily one of the best videos I've made and I'm really proud of it. What will I do with the console in the future? Not a lot. I'd like to maybe swap it for a Nintendo Switch bundle if I had the opportunity, but I don't think the person who bought me the console would be too impressed with that, so it will probably just make a nice dust cover for my TV cabinet. I'm going to wrap up this video with this statement. The Xbox One X is the latest attempt in the 8th generation to fix the graphics. Yet on the grand scheme of things, graphics were the least of this generation's problems. If you are truly interested in the pursuit of graphics, frame rates, performance, and the like, you are simply doing it wrong by buying a console.